What if your peaceful retirement dream turned into a battle against an HOA empire you never even joined? Jack Coleman thought he'd found paradise, a quiet cabin by Hemlock Lake, free from drama, free from rules. Until one morning, he walked outside and found a black iron gate slicing through his backyard like a knife. A blinking security camera, a bold HOA residents-only sign, and a clipboard-wielding neighbor named Karen ready to wage war. But Jack wasn't about to roll over. What started with bolt cutters quickly exploded into secret land deals, midnight sabotage, courtroom showdowns, and the ultimate twist of poetic justice no one saw coming. This isn't just a story about property lines. It's about standing your ground, exposing corruption, and learning that sometimes the strongest fence you can build is one made of respect. If you love real-life drama, neighborhood wars, and the ultimate HOA takedowns, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us here at Real HOA Drama, where small-town battles become legendary stories. Now, let's dive into the chaos. After 27 years of drawing concrete dreams into existence, overpasses, drainage systems, parking lots that stretched like scars across the land, Jack Coleman was finally done. Done with the endless buzz of meetings, the fluorescent purgatory of office cubicles, and the invisible weight of deadlines always pressing against his ribs. Retirement wasn't just a chapter for Jack. It was the long-overdue exhale after a life spent holding his breath. He found it, of all places, tucked away like a secret in the pine-thick folds of Hemlock Lake, a modest A-frame cabin with peeling red shutters, a rickety dock, and a backyard that didn't end until the reeds kissed the glassy water. No mortgage. No HOA lurking like a tick under the skin. No fine print about mailbox heights or what color he could paint his fence. Just him, his battered thermos, a tackle box older than some of his neighbors' kids, and a fishing rod he swore had better aim than he ever did. The cabin wasn't grand by any stretch of the imagination. It leaned slightly to the left, like a drunk old uncle at Thanksgiving. The porch creaked with every step, complaining about the years but holding firm, much like Jack himself. But standing there, barefoot on the splintered boards, the scent of pine heavy in the air, he could feel something settling deep inside him, a kind of peace he hadn't known since he was a boy building forts out of refrigerator boxes. Every morning unfolded like a ritual. Jack would roll out of bed, still in his flannel pajama pants, shuffle into the kitchen to pour lukewarm coffee into his thermos, and wander barefoot down the soft slope behind his cabin. The grass was cool and forgiving under his feet, the mist rising off the lake like the breath of something ancient and wise. He'd sit on the end of the dock, the wood warm where the sun had kissed it, and cast his line into the silence. No conference calls. No angry emails marked urgent. Just the lazy plop of a bobber and the slow inhale-exhale of the water. Sometimes he caught something, usually a modest bluegill or the occasional smug bass staring him for a fight. Sometimes he didn't. It didn't matter. Out here, the scoreboard was broken, and Jack had no interest in fixing it. Neighbors were scarce and friendly in that nodding from a distance way Jack preferred. Once in a while, an elderly couple would wave from their canoe, or a kid would holler from across the cove, showing off a wiggling fish like a trophy. Jack would tip his thermos in salute and get back to his quiet kingdom. This was supposed to be the reward. The prize at the bottom of the Cracker Jack box after decades of grinding. Jack had earned this peace with every hour he spent under flickering fluorescent lights, every birthday he missed because of a late project, every ulcer that burned like wildfire during high-pressure bids. Here, on the edge of Hemlock Lake, Jack wasn't anyone's employee or supervisor or disposable cog in a vast machine. He was just Jack, caretaker of a sloping backyard, protector of a creaky dock, fisherman of patient waters. He never expected trouble. Not here. Not where the mist sang lullabies and the pines stitched shadows across the shore. If anything, Jack thought the biggest drama he'd face would be a raccoon stealing his bait or the occasional lost tourist asking for directions to a hiking trail. But peace, as he was about to learn, is a fragile thing. And sometimes, the worst storms don't come with thunder and lightning. Sometimes they come dressed in lavender blouses and wielding clipboards. Jack Coleman had escaped the chaos of the highways. He just hadn't realized he'd wandered straight into the minefield of small-town politics. And it all started with a splash. It started with a sound Jack couldn't quite place, a heavy, unnatural clink, like metal kissing earth in a way that promised nothing good. He set his coffee down and stepped onto his porch, squinting against the early sun. For a moment, everything looked normal. The mist danced lazily across Hemlock Lake, and the pine trees swayed like old men gossiping about the weather. But then he saw it. Stretching across the gentle slope that led from his backyard to his dock, gleaming like a sneer in the sunlight, was a black iron gate. Thick steel bars jabbed into the earth, an ugly intrusion against the soft greens and blues of the landscape. The fence didn't just block access to the dock. It sliced through Jack's peaceful little world like a scalpel. And if the gate wasn't enough of a slap in the face, the sign made sure the insult was written in bold. HOA residents only. Violators will be prosecuted. Jack stared at it for a long moment, trying to make his brain fit the pieces together. HOA? Here? There wasn't supposed to be an HOA within spitting distance of his cabin. He made damn sure of that when he bought the place. He even asked his realtor twice and cross-referenced the property lines himself, like a man checking for landmines before pitching a tent. And yet, here it was. A gate he never asked for. A fence he never agreed to. A giant metaphorical middle finger made of wrought iron. As if that wasn't enough, Jack's eyes caught a flicker of red. Mounted on a pole just above the gate was a security camera, its little red light blinking like the world's most passive-aggressive Christmas decoration. It was pointed directly at his porch, at him, as if he were the trespasser. Jack felt something deep and molten stir in his chest. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was confusion, disbelief, the slow realization that something was terribly, laughably wrong. A few hours later, he found out exactly who was behind this mess when she came striding up the gravel path with all the self-importance of a general inspecting her troops. Karen Rausch. If ambition could be bottled, Karen would have been a five-alarm fire. She marched up in a stiff lavender blouse that looked like it had been ironed with holy water, sandals that clicked angrily against the stones, and a clipboard clutched so tightly against her chest it was a wonder the thing didn't snap in half. "Good morning," she chirped. All weaponized cheer. "We've installed a protective barrier around the lake access. Strictly for HOA residents, of course. Liability concerns, you understand." Jack blinked at her, feeling like he'd just been mugged by a smiling mannequin. "I live right there," he said, pointing at his cabin. Karen tilted her head and gave him a smile that could have curdled fresh milk. "Well, technically, the access strip belongs to the Hemlock Shores Homeowners Association now. You must have missed the notices. Several, actually." She tapped her clipboard meaningfully, as if it contained the 10 Commandments and Jack had personally violated all 10. Jack opened his mouth, then closed it. There were a lot of words he could have said, none of them polite. Instead, he just stood there, feeling the cold steel of reality settle around him. They had fenced off his peace. They had branded his slice of heaven with HOA ownership. And worst of all, they had the nerve to film him standing there like some criminal caught red-handed stealing serenity. Karen beamed, clearly proud of her work, then pivoted and clicked away, leaving Jack staring at the gate, a monument to arrogance, a shrine to bureaucracy run amok. He had no idea yet just how deep this rabbit hole went. But as he watched that camera blink, blink, blink at him, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Jack wasn't a man prone to rash decisions. 27 years of drafting blueprints and arguing with city inspectors had taught him the value of patience. But that morning, standing in his own backyard and staring at a gate he hadn't authorized, patience was in dangerously short supply. So he did what any red-blooded, mildly furious American would do when faced with a fence that didn't belong. He went to the garage and grabbed his bolt cutters. They were beautiful, in a practical, blue-collar sort of way, heavy, sharp, and coated in just enough rust to suggest they had seen action before. Jack hefted them over his shoulder like a soldier marching off to war. He wasn't planning a full-blown siege. Just a surgical strike. One clean snip, and the absurdity bolted into his soil would be history. He stomped down the slope, the early morning dew soaking through his socks, and positioned the bolt cutters at the nearest section of the black iron fence. For a moment, the world held its breath. Jack squeezed. The metal groaned, a high-pitched, tortured squeal, and just as the cutter bit halfway through, he heard a sharp voice slice through the air. "Step away from the property." Jack turned, bolt cutters still dangling from his hands. There she was, Karen Rausch, standing at the edge of the gravel path with her ever-present clipboard and a cell phone clutched like a weapon. Next to her, looking equally unamused, was a uniformed sheriff's deputy. "Perfect." Karen pointed dramatically, like she was directing traffic at the gates of hell. "This man is attempting to destroy HOA property," she shrieked. Jack wanted to argue, to launch into a speech about rights and common sense and how he'd paid good money to live without HOA nonsense. But the deputy, a broad-shouldered man with tired eyes and a not-my-first-rodeo expression, simply held up a hand. "Sir," he said, voice calm but firm, "put the tool down." Jack sighed, feeling about 10 years older all of a sudden. He dropped the bolt cutters onto the grass with a thud that sounded suspiciously like defeat. The deputy asked for IDs, then spent the next 20 minutes on his radio, checking property maps and lease agreements. Jack waited, arms crossed, watching Karen tap her foot like she was conducting a silent drum solo of smugness. Finally, the deputy returned with bad news etched into the set of his jaw. "Mr. Coleman," he said carefully, "you own your cabin and the surrounding lot, no question. But the strip leading to the lake? Technically, it's under a lease agreement with the Hemlock Shores HOA." Jack felt the words hit like a slap. He blinked. "You're telling me I can't access my own dock?" The deputy winced a little, like he hated what he had to say next. "Not without permission from the leaseholder, which at the moment is the HOA." Karen beamed so brightly Jack swore the temperature dropped 3 degrees just from the sheer spite of it. "Liability issues, you understand," she purred, flipping her clipboard like she was auditioning for Law and Order. "Petty Crimes Unit." Jack nodded stiffly, jaw tight. He could have argued. He could have yelled. But what good would it do? This wasn't a fight he could win with bolt cutters and righteous fury. As the deputy left, apologizing without really apologizing, Jack stood alone in the dew-soaked grass. The camera blinked at him again, a mechanical wink of mockery. And for the first time in a long, long time, Jack Coleman felt utterly, achingly powerless. The dock, the water, the quiet mornings he had fought so hard to claim, now locked behind iron bars and HOA paperwork he never even saw coming. Jack turned slowly back toward his cabin, the bolt cutters abandoned on the ground like a dropped sword after a lost battle. He wasn't beaten yet. But in that moment, it sure as hell felt like it. The days after the bolt cutter incident passed like slow-dripping molasses. Jack tried to go about his life, fixing a squeaky door hinge here, repainting a section of porch there, but every time he looked out toward the lake, the black iron gate stood there, gleaming like a bad joke told at his expense. It wasn't just the fence. It was the principle. It was the fact that someone could, without so much as a knock on the door, drive a stake through his piece and hang a camera on it. Jack knew he couldn't storm the gate. That path had ended in flashing lights and thin-lipped deputies. What he needed now was a miracle, or a loophole. It came, as miracles often do, disguised as something small and almost invisible. Jack was flipping through the local classifieds, mostly out of habit, partly out of stubborn hope, when his eye caught a listing that made him sit up so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. For sale, lakefront strip, partial lot adjacent to Hemlock Shores. Price to sell. Serious inquiries only. Lakefront strip, adjacent to Hemlock Shores. Heart pounding like he'd just hooked a monster base, Jack grabbed his reading glasses and leaned in. The tiny black and white photo was grainy, but he recognized it instantly. A narrow piece of land tucked right beside the iron gate, and by the looks of it, the very soil under the dam fence. He didn't hesitate. He called the number listed, fully expecting some slick-talking realtor to break his heart. Instead, he got Mildred, an elderly woman who sounded half surprised anyone was calling at all. Turns out, the land had been inherited from her late husband, a man who'd once run the old bait shop that used to squat down by the reeds. She'd moved to Alaska years ago and, frankly, forgot the land even existed. "I'll sell it to you for cheap if you can handle the paperwork," Mildred said, almost apologetically. "Honestly, I just want it off my books before tax season." Jack tried to sound calm, professional even. Inside, he was a kid on Christmas morning. 2 weeks later, the deed was signed, notarized, and sitting snug in Jack's lockbox. Jack Coleman was now the proud owner of the strip of land the HOA had illegally gated and fenced. He drove back from the county office with the deed on his passenger seat, glancing at it like it might vanish if he blinked. As he pulled into his gravel driveway, the lake came into view. Beautiful, serene, and behind it, the gate. Only this time, it didn't feel like a wall. It felt like an opportunity. Jack parked, stepped out, and sauntered down to the offending barrier. He placed his palm flat against the cold metal, grinning so wide his cheeks hurt. They had locked him out. They had pointed cameras at him. They had drawn lines in the dirt. But they built their precious gate on his land. For less than the price of a decent fishing boat, Jack had bought himself not just a piece of property, but a front-row seat to poetic justice. He could almost hear Karen Rausch's voice in his head, shrill and disbelieving, once she found out. "This can't be legal." "Well, sweetheart," he thought it was now. Jack chuckled, a deep belly laugh that startled a few crows from the pines. The war wasn't over. Not yet. But for the first time since the fence went up, Jack felt something bright and dangerous stir in his chest. Hope. And if Karen thought Jack was going to just sit quietly behind her stupid gate, she was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. Jack Coleman believed in small victories. He believed that sometimes the best way to win a war wasn't with cannons and flags, but with a well-timed grin and a perfectly placed sign. And today, standing in front of the black iron gate that had once been his prison, Jack was about to claim one hell of a victory. The paperwork was ironclad. The deed was tucked into a folder under his arm, complete with neon yellow highlighter marks and enough legal jargon to make a county clerk weep. No matter how you spun it, twisted it, or wished it different, Jack owned the land now. Every blade of grass, every stubborn weed, and every inch of smug, HOA-funded fencing. Jack pulled out a shiny, heavy-duty padlock, the kind you saw guarding military ammo crates, and snapped it into place on the gate with a satisfying click. It was like the punctuation mark at the end of a very long, very frustrating sentence. But Jack wasn't done.
"No, sir."
From a canvas tote bag, he unfurled a freshly printed laminated sign and bolted it right to the center of the gate, just beneath the old HOA Access Only plaque. It read, in bold black letters, "Private property. Access by owner permission only."
Simple. Clear.
Legally airtight. And because Jack was nothing if not a man of humor, and because he wasn't about to let Karen Rausch walk away from this disaster with her dignity intact, he installed a second, smaller sign underneath the first one. This one said, "Historical Site. Former location of HOA's most glorious failure. Admission. One sincere apology." Jack stepped back and admired his handiwork like an artist viewing a freshly painted canvas. The breeze picked up, making the laminated signs flutter slightly, like flags on a battlefield. He almost wished he had a bugle to play a victory tune. It didn't take long for the news to spread. About an hour after Jack finished, he spotted Karen marching down the gravel path, clipboard in one hand, cell phone in the other, lips pursed so tightly they could have cracked walnuts. She rattled the gate once.
Twice.
Realized the key she'd smugly waved around last month no longer fit. Rattled it again, harder this time, as if maybe sheer willpower could undo legal ownership. Jack, leaning casually against a nearby tree, tipped his thermos at her. Karen didn't waste words. She pulled out her phone and barked into it. "Get me a locksmith."
Urgent.
Jack waited. Patient. Amused. About 20 minutes later, a white van pulled up, with Terry's lock and key emblazoned on the side. Out stepped Terry himself, a wiry man with a ball cap that said, "Best damn locksmith in 3 counties," and the easygoing vibe of a guy who had seen one too many neighborhood dramas. Karen pounced on him immediately. "This lock needs to be removed." "HOA emergency," she hissed. Terry nodded and knelt down at the gate. He studied the lock. He studied the signs. He studied Jack, who was now openly sipping lemonade like he was enjoying a 4th of July parade. "Whose property is this?" Terry asked, frowning. "I am," Jack said, pulling out the deed and flipping it open with a flourish, like a magician revealing the final card. Terry took one look at the highlighted legal descriptions and let out a low whistle. He stood up, dusted off his knees, and turned to Karen. "Can't help you, ma'am. That's his lock. His land. You touch it, you trespass." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a guppy stranded on dry land. But, she stammered. "No buts," Terry said, already walking back to his van. "I like my license too much to mess with the circus." Before he climbed into his truck, he winked at Jack. "Nice signs, buddy." Jack tipped his thermos again in salute. As the locksmith drove away, and Karen fumed silently at the locked gate she no longer controlled, Jack allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The war was far from over. But today, in this little patch of lakeside turf, victory tasted a lot like lemonade. Jack Coleman wasn't expecting an ally. Not after the fence. Not after the cameras. And definitely not after being treated like a criminal on his own soil. But sometimes, life had a funny way of handing you wild cards when you least expected it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, hot and lazy, the kind of day where the lake shimmered like melted glass and the cicadas screamed like tiny, angry chainsaws. Jack was nursing a cold lemonade on his porch when he heard cautious footsteps crunching up the gravel path. He looked up to find Stephanie Howard standing awkwardly at the bottom of his steps, holding a manila folder like it might explode if she squeezed too hard. Stephanie, the HOA secretary, mid-30s, sharp as a tack if her narrowed eyes at meetings were anything to go by. Always tucked in behind Karen like a loyal foot soldier, or so Jack thought. "Got a minute?" she asked, voice low. Jack squinted at her. "Depends. You here to install another gate?" A ghost of a smirk tugged at her lips. "Not exactly." Curiosity outweighed caution, so Jack waved her up. She climbed the steps, glancing over her shoulder like she was expecting Karen to rappel from a tree branch. Without a word, Stephanie handed him the folder. Inside, meeting minutes, financial reports, private memos. And at the top of the stack, highlighted in furious neon pink, were numbers Jack had to read twice just to believe. $88,432.17. Allocated under safety and beautification improvements, but a closer look revealed receipts for all kinds of nonsense. Luxury spa retreats labeled board wellness programs. Overpriced fencing materials from a company suspiciously linked to Karen's cousin. Custom embroidered HOA polo shirts for Team Unity, naturally. Jack let out a low whistle. She spent $88,000 on a fence, massages, and ugly shirts? Stephanie snorted. And a leadership retreat, where she and her niece spent a weekend at Lakeview Spa sipping cucumber water. Jack flipped through the pages, every new receipt more ridiculous than the last. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked finally. Stephanie hesitated. The sun caught in her glasses, hiding her eyes. "Because I'm tired of her," she said. "And you're the only one who stood up to her." Jack leaned back in his chair, studying her. There was no clipboard here. No fake smiles. Just a woman who had seen enough and was finally ready to jump off the sinking ship. "I can't go public," Stephanie added quickly.
Not yet.
"But if you need backup, I can get you board memos, financials, even the original gate installation bids." Jack grinned, a slow, dangerous thing. "Sounds like a plan." Stephanie nodded once, crisp and professional, and disappeared down the path the way she came, silent, swift, leaving nothing behind but a growing storm. Inside Jack's chest, a new kind of excitement sparked to life. He wasn't alone anymore. Karen might have her gate, her camera, her little empire of laminated rules, but Jack now had the next best thing. An insider. And nothing tore down a corrupt kingdom faster than a rebellion from within. That evening, Jack sat on his porch, sipping bourbon instead of lemonade, reading through every deliciously damning document Stephanie had provided. The fence might have been made of steel, but the walls around Karen's throne were made of paper. And Jack had just found the match. Somewhere across the lake, a loom called out into the fading twilight. Jack raised his glass in a silent toast. To allies, to patience, and to the sweet, inevitable collapse of empires built on arrogance. It was close to midnight when Jack's motion sensor light blinked on with a soft, electric hum. Normally, Jack would have ignored it. Maybe a deer wandering too close, or one of the neighborhood raccoons staging another daring garbage heist. But something felt off. Different. Jack set down his book, a murder mystery, ironically, and moved quietly to the window. There, illuminated in the pale halo of the floodlight, was a figure crouched by the gate, fumbling, tugging, muttering curses into the night. Karen Rausch, wearing all black like a suburban ninja who had never quite passed the dress rehearsal. Her lavender blouse was replaced by an ill-fitting hoodie, and her expensive sandals had been swapped for what looked suspiciously like orthopedic sneakers. And in her hand, a screwdriver, jammed against the gate's hinge with the subtlety of a drunk raccoon picking a lock. Jack blinked. For a moment, he thought he might be hallucinating. Then Karen gave a particularly vicious yank, and the screwdriver slipped, sending her sprawling forward in a heap of tangled limbs, caught halfway through the bars like a disgruntled cat trying to escape a too-small window. Jack couldn't help it. He laughed. Not a polite chuckle. Not even a restrained snort. A full, open-throated belly laugh that bounced off the cabin walls and echoed across the silent lake. Outside, Karen froze. Slowly, painfully, she twisted her neck to look back toward the porch and saw Jack standing there in his pajama pants, holding a mug of coffee, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. For one glorious second, their eyes locked, and Karen's face went through all 5 stages of grief in record time: denial, anger, bargaining, despair, and finally, humiliation. Jack sauntered down the porch steps, taking his time, savoring every delicious moment. "Evening, Karen," he drawled, sipping from his mug. "You, lose something?" Karen struggled, trying to yank her leg free from the gate. Her expensive yoga pants, not designed for clandestine acts of sabotage, caught on a jagged corner. With a loud rip, the fabric gave way, leaving her half stuck, half exposed, and wholly defeated. "You installed cameras?" she shrieked, flushing crimson under the glare of the floodlight. Jack nodded solemnly, as if confirming some great spiritual truth.
Sure did.
"On my land. Perfectly legal. And judging by the footage, you've just earned yourself a starring role in the next neighborhood newsletter." Karen sputtered, finally wrenching herself free with an undignified plop onto the muddy ground. She scrambled up, brushing off her torn pants and whatever pride she had left, shooting Jack a glare so venomous it could have curdled milk. "You're being unreasonable," she barked. Jack just smiled wider, pulling out his phone and gesturing to the tiny blinking red light above the gate. "Smile, Karen. You're on candid camera." Defeated, humiliated, and looking for all the world like a raccoon who'd fallen out of a trash can, Karen turned and fled down the gravel path, limping slightly. Jack watched her go, savoring every clumsy, furious step. He knew that news of this little escapade would travel faster than gossip at a church potluck. And sure enough, by morning, the footage was already making the rounds. Someone, Jack would never admit it was him, had anonymously sent a clip to the neighborhood group chat, labeled simply, "When Karen Met Karma." Residents watched, laughed, and whispered over their fences. Even the tight-lipped retirees at the far end of the lake couldn't suppress their grins. Karen's aura of authority didn't just crack that night. It shattered. And Jack, sipping his coffee on the porch as the sun rose pink over Hemlock Lake, knew one thing for sure. Sometimes, you didn't need a lawyer to win a war. Sometimes, all you needed was a camera, a floodlight, and a little bit of poetic justice. There's something about folding chairs and lukewarm lemonade that makes small-town drama feel bigger than it really is. The Hemlock Shores Emergency Community Meeting, hastily called by Karen Rausch herself, was set up under a sagging white canopy by the lake. The irony wasn't lost on Jack. They had to host the meeting within view of the very gate she lost control of. Karen, standing at a makeshift podium, really just a picnic table with a floral tablecloth thrown over it, looked like a general about to address the troops before a losing battle. She wore her best lavender blazer, hair sprayed into a helmet of defiance, and clutched her clipboard like it contained the Constitution itself. Jack, for his part, showed up late. Deliberately. He strolled across the lawn with all the casualness of a man attending a backyard barbecue, not a public trial, thermos in one hand, a fat manila envelope in the other. Karen's eyes narrowed the second she spotted him. "Residents," she barked into a tinny microphone. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We are gathered here to discuss an urgent breach of community safety and decorum, specifically, the actions of one resident who has taken it upon himself to disrupt the harmony of Hemlock Shores." A few heads turned toward Jack. He just smiled and sipped his coffee. Karen's voice rose in practiced outrage. "Mr. Coleman has unlawfully seized common HOA property, blocked resident access to the lake, and installed surveillance equipment intended to intimidate and harass." There were murmurs in the crowd. Some skeptical. Some intrigued. A few entertained. Karen pressed on, building steam. "This cannot stand. We must reclaim our access. We must restore our community." When she paused for dramatic effect, probably expecting applause, she was met with an awkward shuffle of feet and a cough from somewhere in the back. Jack waited a beat, then sauntered up to the edge of the crowd. He cleared his throat, drawing every eye. "Mind if I respond?" he asked casually. Karen hesitated, trapped. If she said no, she'd look like a tyrant. If she said yes, well, she said yes. Jack pulled a folded document from his envelope and held it up for all to see. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the official deed to the strip of land the gate sits on," he said, voice carrying easily without a microphone. "Filed, recorded, and legally owned by me." He pulled out another paper. "This is the county map, highlighting the parcel boundary. Notice the bright yellow line? That's mine." Another paper. "This is a letter from the county clerk's office confirming there are no easements, no common ownership, and no HOA jurisdiction over this land." He laid them neatly on the table in front of Karen, whose face had gone the color of undercooked oatmeal. Silence hung heavy for a moment. Then, somewhere near the back, someone snickered. Another chuckled. And then, like a dam breaking, the crowd erupted, not into jeers, but into applause. Real applause. The kind that echoed off the lake and made a few startled ducks flap into the air. Karen stood frozen, mouth opening and closing, clipboard sagging in her arms. Jack simply tipped his thermos at her, the universal signal for "bless your heart." With her dignity bleeding out faster than a popped inner tube, Karen did the only thing she could. She gathered her papers with trembling hands, muttered something about reviewing legal options, and beat a hasty retreat through the folding chairs. The laughter followed her like a faithful dog. Jack watched her go, feeling a strange, fierce satisfaction rise in his chest. He hadn't needed to shout. He hadn't needed to fight dirty. All he needed was the truth, and the patience to let Karen bury herself. As the crowd began to disperse, some clapping him on the back, others shaking his hand, Jack realized something profound. Sometimes the sweetest victories are the ones you win without ever raising your voice. The audit hit Karen Rausch like a hurricane crashing through a sandcastle. It started small, a whispered rumor here, a suspicious glance there, until finally, fueled by Stephanie's quiet rebellion and Jack's undeniable paperwork, the HOA board called for a full financial review. What they found wasn't just a few misplaced receipts or sloppy accounting. It was a bonfire of bad decisions, fueled by nearly $88,000 of safety improvements that included things like aromatherapy spa treatments, catered board lunches, and an inexplicable team-building escape room trip 2 counties over. When the numbers were presented at the next HOA meeting, Karen didn't even try to spin it. She simply turned beet red, muttered something about being misunderstood, and resigned on the spot, clipboard and all, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. But the real kicker came a week later, when a letter arrived from the statewide Homeowners Association registry. Effective immediately, Karen Rausch was barred from holding any leadership position in any HOA across the entire state. It was the HOA equivalent of being banned from every country club, bake sale committee, and PTO meeting within a 1,000-mile radius. The woman who once ruled Hemlock Shores with a lavender iron fist was now officially a cautionary tale. Without Karen's iron grip strangling the board, change came fast and easy. The community elected a new board, younger, sharper, and, most importantly, willing to listen. Stephanie was voted in as the new secretary. Bylaws were rewritten with an emphasis on transparency, neighborly cooperation, and the radical idea that maybe, just maybe, fences weren't the solution to every minor inconvenience. The black iron gate still stood, of course. But now it was different. Jack, in an act of subtle but powerful grace, had left it unlocked during the day, swinging gently in the breeze like an open invitation. A new laminated sign hung there, neat and simple. Private property. Access with owner permission. Respect earns welcome. Entitlement earns nothing. And people respected it. If a kid wanted to fish off the dock, he asked. If a retiree wanted to sit by the water and read, she waved and waited for a nod. The lakefront became, paradoxically, more open after the gate went up because people had to approach it with kindness, not assumption. And Jack became something of a local legend. Neighbors started calling him the gatekeeper of Hemlock Lake, half joking, half reverent. Someone even made a t-shirt with his silhouette leaning on the gate, thermos in hand, under the words, "You shall not base." Jack wore it exactly once, during the first community barbecue hosted by the new HOA board. The kids loved it. Even the old-timers got a kick out of it. Standing there that evening, a paper plate of ribs in one hand, a fishing pole balanced against the gate, Jack realized that somehow, against all odds, the fence that was meant to lock him out had ended up bringing the community together. Hemlock Lake shimmered in the sunset, peaceful and patient as always. The battles, the paperwork, the midnight standoffs, they all faded into the background, leaving behind something stronger than any lawsuit could ever create. A neighborhood built on respect. And Jack Coleman, unlikely hero, reluctant symbol, official gatekeeper, could finally sit back in his creaky porch chair, lift his thermos high, and toast to a future that looked a whole lot brighter. And a whole lot less fenced in. Summer at Hemlock Lake had a way of softening everything. The mornings were wrapped in mist and birdsong, and the afternoons slid into slow, honeyed evenings where the biggest excitement was whether someone caught a base bigger than a loaf of bread. Jack Coleman had settled into this rhythm perfectly, almost like the old dock posts sinking comfortably into the water, steady and sure. One late afternoon, just as the cicadas began their nightly orchestra, Jack found an envelope tucked under the gate sign. No postage. No formal address. Just his name written in a careful, slightly wobbly hand. Mr. Jack. Curious, he opened it there on the spot. Inside was a note, written on wide-ruled paper with a kind of earnestness only kids could muster. Dear Mr. Jack. Thank you for keeping the dock open for us. My grandpa said not everyone is brave enough to stand up for what's right. I hope I can be brave too. From Mason, the kid with the blue hat. Jack read the letter twice, then a third time. For a long moment, he simply stood there, the letter trembling slightly in the evening breeze, as the weight of everything, the battles, the laughter, the absurdity, settled into something quieter, something sweeter. He folded the note carefully and tucked it into the pocket of his fishing vest, right next to the old rusted padlock he had kept all this time, a souvenir of pettiness overcome. It was a good day, a full day, and it might have ended there, if not for the unexpected crunch of tires on gravel. Jack turned just in time to see a silver sedan pull up near the end of the road. The door opened, and out stepped a figure he hadn't seen in months, but recognized immediately. Karen Rausch. Gone were the lavender blouses and the staccato click of high heels. Today she wore jeans, a loose sweater, and sneakers that had seen actual dirt. She didn't march up the path. She didn't wave a clipboard like a battle standard. She just stood there, a few yards away, staring at the gate, at the dock, at the place where everything had unraveled and rebuilt itself without her. For a beat, Jack wondered if she would say something, demand something, but she didn't. Karen simply met his gaze across the distance, and with a small, almost imperceptible nod, half apology, half surrender, she acknowledged what words couldn't fix. Jack, still holding Mason's letter in one hand, gave a tiny nod back. No anger, no victory lap, just understanding. Karen turned, got back in her car, and drove away, the dust rising briefly behind her before settling into nothing. Jack watched until the road was empty again, then walked down the familiar worn path to his favorite spot on the dock. The water lapped gently against the pilings. The gate swung slightly in the breeze, no longer a barrier, but a reminder of choices made, of battles fought, of kindness that had somehow survived it all. He baited his hook slowly, smiling to himself. Because in the end, Jack realized it had never been about the gate, or the land, or even the lake. It was about something bigger. Simplicity, respect,
Community.
real strength didn't come from locks or fences or laminated rules. It came from a willingness to welcome the right people through the gate, and the wisdom to know when to leave it swinging open. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long golden fingers across the water, Jack cast his line into the shimmering surface. And Hemlock Lake, eternal and patient, welcomed him home.